The Northern Territory has a tiny population spread over a vast and remote part of Australia, yet has the highest rates of domestic, family and sexual violence in the country and among the highest in the world. Women here experience 3 times the national rates of domestic violence-related assaults and 7 times the national average of intimate partner homicides. But why is this the case? To understand, we need to look deeper at the factors that contribute to violence at multiple levels: individual, relationship, community, and societal. Using the socio-ecological model, we can explore the complex and interwoven reasons behind these high rates. At the individual level, factors such as age for both younger and older people, income, housing security, alcohol and substance misuse, and a history of violence can make a person more likely to experience or use violence. Individual attitudes and beliefs also increase the likelihood of violence, such as gender inequitable attitudes or attitudes supportive or tolerant of violence. Such factors disproportionately exist in the Northern Territory. For example, homelessness in the Northern Territory is 12 times the national rate. People without stable housing are more vulnerable to experiencing violence. Often, victim survivors are forced to choose between living with a violent partner or becoming homeless. The Northern Territory also experiences extreme overcrowding, which places stresses on households and increases the risk of violence. Substance abuse is another factor that can exacerbate violence, and the Northern Territory has high rates of harmful alcohol consumption and the highest rates of alcohol-induced mortality, with 3.5 times the national average. Some victim survivors may use alcohol or other drugs as an adaptation to manage the trauma they have experienced. It's important to know that alcohol and other drugs do not cause violence, and it's important not to pathologize addiction, but it can increase the frequency and the severity of violence. For some people, a history of violence or exposure to violence in childhood can set the stage for perpetrating these harmful patterns as adults. The relationship level also plays a significant role in the violence seen in the Northern Territory. Family dynamics, including power imbalances and inequitable decision-making, can increase the likelihood of conflict and violence. For many people, when violence is common, it becomes normalized. When violence is a part of daily life, it can become an accepted method of coping or of asserting power in relationships. In many Indigenous communities, complex kinship systems and family structures, while providing strong cultural support, can also trap women in violent situations. Escaping can be difficult, as violence often involves not just one perpetrator but multiple, and may lead to intergenerational cycles of violence and reprisals within the family. It's also important that the responsibility for ending the violence is not placed on the victim. It is the sole responsibility of the person using violence. At the community level, poverty and limited access to resources increases the risk of violence. In remote communities, there are fewer educational and employment opportunities. There is also often inadequate housing, overcrowding, and poor infrastructure such as a lack of phone and internet, which increases the isolation these communities experience and makes it difficult to call for help. High rates of poverty and disadvantage in the Northern Territory further compound the risk. It's important to acknowledge these are systemic issues, and remote communities are also places of incredible strength, resilience, culture, and language. Finally, at the societal level, broader structures, policies, and cultural norms shape the landscape of violence. The ongoing impacts of colonisation and gender inequality are considered drivers of violence because they are systemic societal issues that manifest in different risk factors for violence at the individual, relationship, and community levels. Australia's history of and current ongoing colonisation has had lasting effects, particularly on Indigenous communities. Dispossession, forced relocation, and intergenerational trauma are ongoing and continue to impact Aboriginal people, families and communities. Colonisation continues to shape contemporary Australian systems, policies, legislation and relationships with First Peoples. Colonisation perpetrates systems that advantage non-Indigenous people over Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, creating power imbalances and entrenches poverty and disadvantage. Gender inequality continues to place men in a position of power over women and children. Condoning violence against women, men's control and dominance of decision-making, limits to women's independence, harmful forms of masculinity, rigid gender stereotyping, and male peer relations that emphasize dominance and control are all manifestations of gender inequality that create risk factors for violence and make it more difficult for victim survivors to access help and support. Government policies often fail to address the underlying issues and drivers of violence against women and children, with institutional racism further compounding the problem. Many Indigenous women struggle to find the support they need because the institutions meant to help them, such as the police or health services, are not equipped to deal with the specific needs and cultural sensitivities of Aboriginal communities. These systemic barriers make it harder for women to escape violent situations and seek justice. The compounding risk factors at each of these levels, individual, relationship, community, and societal, combine to create a perfect storm for violence. In the Northern Territory, these risk factors are disproportionately high. The lack of adequate infrastructure, education, healthcare, and housing all create an environment where violence is more likely to occur and more difficult to escape. However, communities in the Northern Territory are also incredibly resilient. Creative and innovative work is underway to address the high rates of violence that are community-driven and supported by the specialist domestic, family and sexual violence sector. Understanding these factors is the first step towards change. By addressing the underlying causes at each level, the individual, the family, the community and society, we can begin to break the cycle of violence. Support services, culturally appropriate community-driven programming, better housing, and education are all vital in creating a safer future for everyone in the Northern Territory.